Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're going deep into the world of AI. Specifically, we're talking about jailbreaking large language models, those LLMs we always hear about. You sent over some super interesting research on a new method for doing this called KDA.
KDA.
Yeah, it stands for Knowledge Distilled Attacker, which sounds a bit ominous, don't you think?
It does have a certain ring to it, doesn't it? But yeah, jailbreaking these models is a critical area of research. It's all about understanding their vulnerabilities, so we can use them safely and responsibly.
Exactly, because LLMs are popping up everywhere, right? From healthcare to finance, it's like having these supercharged chatbots on steroids almost.
Yeah.
So can we break this down a little for our listeners who might not be totally familiar? What exactly are we talking about when we say jailbreaking an LLM?
Well, think of it like this. Imagine you have a friend who's super cautious, always plays by the rules. Jailbreaking is like finding a way to convince that friend to do something a little adventurous, to step outside their comfort zone. In the context of LLMs, it's about finding ways to bypass the safety protocols that are built in.
So we're trying to trick them into misbehaving.
Well, in a way, yes. The goal is to get the LLM to do things it's not supposed to do, like generating harmful content or revealing sensitive information. But it's not about causing harm, it's about uncovering those weaknesses.
I see. So it's like ethical hacking, but for AI.
You could say that. Researchers want to find those vulnerabilities before someone with less noble intentions does.
Makes sense. And the paper you sent over mentioned that early attempts at this, at jailbreaking, were all manual, really time-consuming. But this KDA model, this seems like a game changer.
It really is. What makes KDA so interesting is that it's automated, and it learns from the best, The researchers trained it on a whole bunch of successful attack prompts, ones that were made using 3 other really powerful methods.
Okay, so it's like a master thief, studying the techniques of other criminals.
Huh. Yeah, I like that analogy. And because KDA has this diverse training, it's way more efficient than previous methods.
So it's fast, it's effective, and it works on. The paper mentioned some big names, right? Like Llama 2 is in there.
Oh yeah, Llama 2, GPT 3.5, even GPT 4. They tested KDA against a whole range of LLMs, both open source and commercial ones, and the results were pretty impressive.
I bet. Especially when they use that harm bench thing. Right, I remember seeing that in the paper.
Yeah, harm bench is a more rigorous way of evaluating these attacks, specifically focusing on the potential for harm. And even against that, KDA had high success rates.
So even the most advanced LLMs, they're not foolproof. That's kind of unsettling, but also like really important to know, right?
Absolutely. It highlights the need for better security, for more robust defenses as these LLMs become more powerful and, let's face it, more integrated into our lives.
It's like a constant arms race, isn't it? Between those developing the LLMs and those trying to, break them.
Exactly. And KDA is definitely a formidable weapon in that arms race. But what's really fascinating is that it's not just about brute force. It's not just about, overwhelming the LLM with attacks. It's about understanding how they work, how they think.
How do you mean?
Well, KDA is able to generate a huge variety of attack prompts using different formats, different topics, you name it. This diversity is key because it allows researchers to really probe the LLM, to find those weak spots from all angles.
Like testing a fortress, right? You got to try all the different approaches to find the vulnerability. And this diversity, I'm guessing this is super important for you as you keep digging into this research.
Absolutely. It's not enough to just see if an LLM can be tricked in one specific way. We need to make sure it can withstand a whole barrage of attacks. And KDA is giving us the tools to do that, which is really exciting, but also a bit unnerving when you think about the potential for misuse.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. This technology, it's amazing, but what if it falls into the wrong hands? Could someone use KDA to actually create harmful content to weaponize these LLMs?
Yeah. It's a valid concern. I mean, any powerful tool can be misused. But the researchers behind KDA, they acknowledge this. They emphasize the importance of responsible disclosure, of collaborating with developers to make sure these vulnerabilities are addressed, not exploited.
That's good to hear. So it's like they're giving us a heads up, but also saying, hey, let's use this for good, not for evil.
Exactly. And that's really what it comes down to. The goal here is to make LLMs safer, more reliable, more beneficial for everyone. And KDA, despite its intimidating name, is actually helping us do that.
By finding the flaws, we can fix them.
Precisely. It's like you can't build a stronger house if you don't know where the weak points are. And KDA is helping us identify those weak points so we can build better, more robust LLMs.
Okay, so we've talked about the problem LLMs are vulnerable, and we've talked about KDA, this really clever way of finding those vulnerabilities. But what are the solutions? What can developers do to actually protect their LLMs from these kinds of attacks?
That's the million-dollar question. And there's no easy answer. But one thing's for sure. We need to move beyond just patching holes as they appear. We need a more fundamental shift in how we approach LLM security. We need to start thinking like the attackers.
So, like, get inside their heads.
Yeah, we need to anticipate the kinds of attacks they might launch and build defenses accordingly. And research like KDA is giving us a glimpse into that attacker mindset, which is incredibly valuable.
So by understanding how to break them, we can learn how to better protect them.
Exactly. It's like that saying the best defense is a good offense. And KDA is a very good offense. It's forcing us to up our game in LLM security, and that's ultimately a good thing for everyone.
Well said. But I'm still curious, what are some of those practical steps that developers can take? What can they do to make their LLMs more KDA-proof?
Well, one promising approach is adversarial training. It's like giving the LLM a martial arts training course, exposing it to all sorts of attacks so it can learn to defend itself.
That's a cool way to think about it, but how do you actually do that? How do you train an LLM to fight back against these attacks?
It involves feeding the LLM a bunch of adversarial examples during its training phase, essentially showing it all the tricks that attackers might use. This helps the LLM develop a more robust understanding of what constitutes a malicious prompt, making it less likely to fall for those tricks.
So it's like giving its immune system a boost.
Exactly. And there are other approaches being explored as well, like developing specialized AI systems that can specifically detect and neutralize malicious prompts before they even reach the LLM.
So it's like having a digital bodyguard for the LLM.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. These AI bodyguards would be trained to recognize the patterns of malicious behavior and step in to protect the LLM.
That's incredible. So we're talking about AI protecting AI. It sounds like something out of a science fiction movie.
It does, doesn't it? But this is the reality of where we're headed. As AI systems become more complex and more integrated into our lives, we need equally sophisticated systems to protect them.
That makes sense. It's like you wouldn't build a high-tech fortress without some serious security measures in place.
Exactly. And LLM security is becoming increasingly important, especially with models like KDA showing us just how vulnerable these systems can be.
Well, this has been fascinating. But before we wrap up this first part of our deep dive, I want to bring it back to our listeners. If someone out there is developing an LLM, what's the one key takeaway they should be thinking about?
I'd say it's this. Don't underestimate the importance of security. Don't assume that your LLM is invincible. Test it, challenge it, and constantly be looking for ways to improve its defenses.
Think like the attacker.
Exactly, because the attackers are already thinking like you.
And that, my friends, is a sobering thought to end on.
We'll be right back after a quick break to delve even deeper into the world of LLM security and explore some of those exciting new defense mechanisms. Stay tuned.
All right, so we're back, and we've established that these LLMs, they're powerful, they're versatile, but they're not invincible. And this KDA model, it's really exposed some of those vulnerabilities. But it's not just about finding the flaws, right? It's about understanding them, learning from them.
Exactly. KDA isn't just randomly generating prompts. It's actually revealing something deeper about how LLMs work, how they think.
Okay, so what's the takeaway here? What insights has KDA given us about the way LLMs process information?
Well, it seems like a lot of these successful attacks, they exploit this tendency of LLMs to rely on patterns. They're trained on these massive data sets. They're looking for connections, for associations.
So even though they're incredibly complex, there are still these predictable weaknesses.
You could say that. It's like they get so focused on following the rules, the patterns they've learned, that they don't always recognize when those rules are being bent or broken.
And that's where KDA comes in, right?
Yeah.
It's figured out how to exploit those blind spots.
Precisely. And that's what makes it so effective. It's not just brute force. It's about understanding the nuances of how LLMs think and then crafting prompts that target those vulnerabilities.
So it's like KDA has learned to speak the LLM's language, but in a way that tricks it.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And this is where the knowledge distillation part comes in. Remember, KDA is trained on all those successful attack prompts from other methods. It's like it's learned from the best. It's got this whole arsenal of tricks up its sleeve.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So KDA is this incredibly powerful tool for finding vulnerabilities. But how do we turn that knowledge into better defenses? What can developers actually do to make their LLMs more KDA-proof?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it? And there's no easy answer, but one promising avenue is this idea of adversarial training.
Adversarial training, we touched on this earlier, right? It's like giving the LLM a self-defense course.
Exactly. It's like if you want to train a boxer, you don't just have them punch a bag, you have them spar with other boxers, right? You expose them to different styles, different attacks.
So you're basically training the LLM to fight back against these malicious prompts.
Precisely. You expose it to a whole range of adversarial examples during the training process, so it learns to recognize and resist those kinds of manipulations.
So it's not just about building a stronger wall around the LLM. It's about making the LLM itself stronger, more resilient.
Exactly. And there are other strategies being explored as well. Like some researchers are working on developing these specialized AI systems, almost like digital bodyguards, that can detect and neutralize malicious prompts before they even reach the LLM.
Okay, so we've got these tougher training methods. We've got these AI bodyguards. What about something a little more low-tech? Are there any, practical tips that everyday users can do to protect themselves? Because these LLMs, they're not just in research labs anymore. They're in our phones. They're in our homes.
That's a great point. And I think the most important thing is just awareness. Users need to understand that these systems, as amazing as they are not perfect.
So don't just blindly trust everything they say.
Exactly. Approach LLMs with a healthy dose of skepticism. Just like you wouldn't believe everything you read online, don't just accept everything an LLM tells you at face value. Double-check the information, consider the source, and be mindful of potential biases.
That's good advice in general, right? Don't believe everything you read on the internet. But with AI, it's like that advice becomes even more important.
Absolutely. And this brings us to another important consideration, the ethical implications of this whole research area. KDA, it's a powerful tool, but like any powerful tool, it can be misused.
Right, that's what we were talking about earlier. Someone could use KDA to actually create harmful content, right? To weaponize these LLMs.
Exactly. And that's why we need to be having these conversations about responsible AI development. It's not just about building cool technology, it's about making sure that technology is used for good. We need to establish clear ethical guidelines, safeguards to prevent misuse.
So it's not just about the tech itself, it's about the people behind it, the people using it.
Precisely. And it's a conversation that needs to involve everyone, researchers, developers, policymakers, even the general public. We need to be thinking about the potential impact of this technology and working together to ensure that it's used responsibly.
And that leads us perfectly into our next topic, the future of LLM security. What's next in this constant evolution of attack and defense? What are the new frontiers?
Well, as we've seen with KDA, the development of these sophisticated attackers, it's actually driving innovation in LLM security. It's forcing researchers and developers to think outside the box and come up with new and more robust defenses.
So it's like this arms race, it's actually pushing the field forward.
Exactly. Each side is trying to outsmart the other, and that leads to some really interesting developments. For example, we're seeing a lot of research into these specialized AI systems that are specifically designed to detect and neutralize malicious prompts.
Like AI bodyguards, but even more sophisticated.
Exactly. Imagine an AI system that's trained on massive amounts of data, able to recognize patterns of malicious behavior and intervene before any harm is done.
That's wild. So we're talking about AI protecting AI. It's like the future is here.
It really is. And these AI guardians, they're just one example of the innovative approaches being explored. We're also seeing research into ways to make LLMs themselves more secure, more resilient from the inside out.
How do you mean?
Well, one idea is to instill LLMs with a greater sense of self-awareness. Can we teach them to recognize when they're being manipulated and resist those attempts?
So instead of blindly following instructions, they would be able to say, hold on, something's not right here.
Exactly. We want LLMs that are not just intelligent, but also wise, able to discern between genuine requests and potentially harmful ones.
It's like giving them a moral compass, a sense of right and wrong.
In a way, yes. It's about developing a kind of digital street smarts for AI, teaching them to be cautious, to question, to think critically.
Okay, that's mind-blowing. So we're talking about a future where AI is not just powerful, but also responsible. Ethical.
That's the hope. It's a challenging goal, but it's one that researchers are working towards. Because ultimately, we want AI that benefits humanity, that makes our lives better, not worse. And that requires careful consideration of the ethical implications as well as the technical challenges.
And that's what makes this whole field so fascinating, right? It's not just about bits and bytes, it's about the future, about who we are, about what we want to become.
Well said. It's a journey, and we're all on it together.
Well, dear listener, we've covered a lot of ground in this second part of our deep dive. We've explored the specific insights revealed by KDA, discussed the practical steps developers can take to improve LLM security, and touched on the ethical considerations surrounding this research.
And as we move into our final segment, we'll delve even deeper into the future of LLM security, exploring some of the cutting-edge technologies and strategies that are being developed to protect these powerful systems.
Okay, so we're back, and we've been talking about this fascinating but kind of scary world of LLM jailbreaking. It's like every time researchers come up with a new defense, the attackers find a new way to break in. It makes you wonder, is there any way to truly secure these systems?
It's a good question, and it's one that's keeping a lot of researchers up at night. But I wouldn't say it's hopeless. In fact, the development of attackers like KDA, it's actually pushing the field of LLM security forward in really interesting ways.
How so? I mean, it seems like every time we find a solution, the attackers just come up with a new problem.
That's true. It's a constant back and forth. But that kind of pressure, that competition, it drives innovation. It forces us to think outside the box, to come up with more creative, more robust solutions.
So it's like the better the attackers get, the better the defenses have to become.
Exactly. It's an arms race, but it's one that's ultimately beneficial for the field as a whole.
Okay, so what are some of those innovations? What's on the horizon for LLM security? What are researchers working on right now that has you excited?
Well, we've already talked about adversarial training, which is a really promising approach.
Yeah, the whole give the LLM a self-defense course thing,
Oh,
right?
exactly. And as we discussed, it's all about exposing the LLM to a wide range of attacks during training so it learns to recognize and resist those kinds of manipulations.
Well, we also talked about some other approaches, right?
Yep.
Like those AI bodyguards that can protect LLMs from malicious prompts.
Absolutely. That's another really exciting area of research. Imagine an AI system that's so sophisticated it can analyze incoming prompts, recognize patterns of malicious behavior, and neutralize those threats before they can even reach the LLM.
So it's like having a super smart security system for your AI.
Exactly. And these AI guardians, they could be incredibly effective. I mean, they could potentially block entire classes of attacks, preventing them from ever reaching the LLM in the first place.
Wow, that's impressive. But all of these defenses we've talked about, they're kind of like external measures, right? Like we're building these walls around the LLMs to protect them. But what about the LLMs themselves? Can we make them inherently more secure?
That's a great question, and it's something that researchers are definitely exploring. One really fascinating idea is to instill LLMs with a greater sense of self-awareness.
Self-awareness, like teach them to think for themselves.
In a way, yes. We want LLMs that can recognize when they're being manipulated, when someone's trying to trick them into doing something harmful, and then ideally, they would be able to resist those attempts.
So instead of just blindly following instructions, they would be able to say, wait a minute, this doesn't feel right.
Exactly. We want LLMs that are not just intelligent, but also wise, able to make judgments about the information they're given and the requests they receive.
It's like giving them a moral compass.
You could say that. It's about developing a kind of digital street smarts for AI, teaching them to be cautious, to question, to think critically about the world around them.
That's incredible. But how do you even begin to teach an AI something like that? It seems like such a human quality.
It's definitely a challenge, but there are some promising approaches. One idea is to incorporate ethical principles into the training data itself, so the LLM learns to associate certain actions or outcomes with positive or negative values.
So it's like instead of just teaching them what to do, you're teaching them why they should or shouldn't do it.
Precisely. And this could be really powerful. If we can teach LLMs to reason about ethics, to understand the consequences of their actions, then we can make them much more trustworthy, much more reliable.
That's amazing. So we're talking about a future where AI is not just smart, but also ethical, responsible. It's pretty mind-blowing.
It is, isn't it? And it's a future that's within our reach. But it's going to require a lot of hard work, a lot of collaboration, and a lot of careful thought about the kind of world we want to create with this technology.
Well said. And that, my friends, is what the deep dive is all about. Exploring these complex issues, asking the tough questions, and trying to make sense of this crazy, Amazing world we live in.
It's been a pleasure diving in with you today.
Likewise. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this incredible journey into the world of LLM jailbreaking and AI security. We hope you've learned something new, that you've been challenged, maybe even a little bit inspired. Remember, the future of AI is in our hands. It's up to all of us to shape it responsibly, ethically, and with a vision for a better world. Until next time, keep those minds curious and those questions coming. This is The Deep Dive, signing off.